As I said already, the strategy of the global Islamic movement is to implement Sharia law everywhere. And one of the reasons why the administration can never explain what countering violent extremism actually is because it's a policy that's based on tactics. If you base a policy on tactics, it's like basing something like trying to define the taste of chocolate. Can you tell me what chocolate tastes like? Well, then you must not know what chocolate tastes like, right? No, we don't have words in our vocabulary to describe the abstract concept of what chocolate tastes and feels like, but we all know, don't we? So when they try to describe countering violent extremism and they don't ever make any sense, it's because they're trying to define a tactic. What if they simply told us that the global Islamic movement's goal is to implement Sharia law? Then everything that they do would fall into line and it would make perfect sense. I'm not saying that you would agree with the way they're going about it, or that you would be able to deal with the horrific violence that's affiliated with it, but at least you would understand what they plainly state their intention is. So we're being misled over and over again. You don't have to read all of this. This is by Syed Qutb. He's the founder and one of the leaders of the original Muslim Brotherhood Party that was founded in Egypt in 1928 as an Islamic revival movement. Have you heard that word lately over there in Syria and Iraq? ISIS calls itself an Islamic revival movement. ISIS is actually a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood because the core of ISIS is literally Muslim Brotherhood. But look down at the bottom what their goal is: to bring about the rule of God's law on earth. This is Syed Qutb. All he's saying is what I've told you already, and that's what I'm trying to reinforce. My job, I feel, between now and the election is to help shift the narrative away against an endless counterproductive argument about, let's say, the meaning of jihad, tactical, while we never discuss the strategy. And I believe it has been working. I've been hearing a lot more people on the media, clear up to the government level, talking about the goal of implementing Sharia rather than the various tactics that are being used to do it. Did any of you see the testimony I gave before Ted Cruz on the 28th of June in his hearing before the Judiciary Committee? It was called Willful Blindness. Did anyone see 2 days later when Ted Cruz called Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson into the same room and asked him, what about Philip Haney's claims about deletion of information from the law enforcement system? Do anybody remember what he said? I'll tell you. Do you know Philip Haney? I wouldn't know Mr. Hannon if he walked into the same room. Well, have you taken the time to look into his claims? I already told you no, I don't know him, and no, I haven't taken the time to look into his claims. And by now his body language is he's leaning way back in the chair. And anybody that knows body language, nonverbal communication, knows that he's trying to escape. In other words, he's on a severe defensive. And then Ted Cruz really nailed him. Well, if it was true, would you be concerned? No, I wouldn't be concerned. It's really just a semantic argument about labels. And then he went on to this whole long non-answer riff. But what I realized in listening to him was really quite profound. According to Jay Johnson and the Obama administration, who believe that even calling ISIS, for example, will make them even madder than they already are, and that we have to cooperate with these Muslim groups, which he didn't bother to mention were all Muslim Brotherhood groups, that somehow that is going to put us greater at risk. And then I realized what he's really saying. I'm the national security risk because I'm contradicting the administration and doing it right now in front of the whole world. I am the one that they consider the national security risk. And then it began to make sense. No wonder they investigated me 9 times. No wonder they took my gun. No wonder they cut off all the access to the systems that I ever used. No wonder they revoked my secret clearance. No wonder they sequestered me for 11 months at the end of my career while I was waiting for the outcome of 3 simultaneous investigations from the Department of Justice on criminal charges, including a grand jury to indict me and put me in jail. I would have been sitting right next to Dinesh D'Souza. Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, Internal Affairs put 2 of their best officers, investigators, and spent 2 years investigating me. That's a lot of effort. I wish they would have spent that much time investigating these groups that they spent investigating me. The whole time, all 9 together, probably took 5 or 6 years of person time to do, which they could have been spending on actually investigating terrorism. And the third one was the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security, who investigated me as well. All 3 going on at the same time. But I will tell you, it had a good ending. You can read about it in the book, but the bottom line is, none of the charges stuck. Right. I was exonerated, the charges were dropped. And I was actually allowed to retire honorably July 31st, 2015, and I add the caveat honorably simply because during all that long 10-year process, there was no certainty of outcome. And if I had violated subsection 3C-2.1 at any time along the way, I would have been done for. I would not be standing here talking to you, because they would have made double darn sure that they would have discredited me in public. Why didn't Jay Johnson simply say, Mr. Haney is full of it. His claims are false. Why not? Because he cannot. He knows it. He said he didn't know me, but the fact was he did know me. He talked about me publicly in January of this year before a group of students, Muslim students, in a city right over there called Detroit. He does know me.
Did you get your gun back?
No, I retired. Sorry, what? My wife's health and my own career. That's what it cost me. My wife went the 21st of September of 2014. I came in to report for duty just like if anything can ever be called normal in my life. But the day I came in, Haney, we need you to go over there. Whenever anybody in management tells you need to go over there, that's not a good thing. I walked into the room, I opened the door up, and there's 4 of my colleagues. We're all armed officers. They say, Haney, we need your gun now. So I said, how would you like to have it? So I took it out, turned it sideways, ejected. You want me to take the magazine out first, drop it? Yeah, so I pushed the release tab, dropped the magazine, handed it to him sideways. Because the last thing I needed to do is some kind of so-called abrupt movement. And then they said, we need your other 2 magazines too. So I handed them 2. And they filled out a few forms, and down there it said they never told me why they took my gun. Ever, even to this day. Except that you will all know, anybody in law enforcement, when they take your gun, it's like stripping you naked in public. Everybody knows it. Oh, what did Haney do now? He must have really messed up this time. And then they sequestered me for 11 months. They did not want me talking to my colleagues.
You have the names of those 4 men in your book?
I have provided all of the names to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Everything. I kept everything. Oh, I didn't tell you. I'm a founding member of the Nerd Society. I was a scientist before counterterrorism. I was an entomologist. I worked in international agriculture all over the world, and I was a specialist in ants. Yeah, so how do you go from ants to counterterrorism? It's really not so hard. I'll mention that a good entomologist is a careful observer of behavior and also careful attention to detail. Because in biology, when there are changes that go on in a system, like in agriculture, they are very often so subtle that if you're not paying careful attention, you will miss it. So you combine observation of behavior and careful attention to detail, and being a student or a subject matter expert in ants, you simply follow the trail and find the nest. And that's what I did. And then push reset button and do it over and over again. The problem is, in a nutshell, the administration doesn't believe there's a nest. That they are random ants of violence. Remember random acts of violence that Janet Napolitano came up with? Well, I coined a phrase of satire, random ants of violence. If you take an ant away from his trail and his fellow ants and put him in a little jar, he'll die in hours. They can't survive outside the bubble of the colony. And another intriguing thing about them is that, anybody ever encountered fire ants down there in the south? Did you know that the entire population of the fire ants across from all the way from North Carolina clear out to New Mexico is all one colony? Wow. Think about that for a minute in application of what we're talking about now. They are omnivorous, they invade space, and they push every other species out of the way. And they're all one super colony. What does Sharia look like today in our world? Here's an example of a flow chart. If this was an animated icon, of course it would be changing constantly, but the whole point of this map is to show the motivation, what I call the gravitational pull, the gravitational force that pulls these people from all over the world. And it is not to go fight jihad. Even though that is what they're doing, that's not their actual objective. Their objective is to go help implement and secure Sharia law using those swords that you saw, so to speak, in the very first icon. For those of you that are biblical, this verse in Hebrew says, Lo yishama od Hamas be'artseh. And in English it means this: no longer shall you hear violence in your land. The verb for violence in Hebrew is Hamas. That top left letter with the square letter and the one in the middle and the one that looks kind of like a circle, that's Hamas in Hebrew. Every time Israelis hear the word Hamas, they don't think of a group, they think of violence. But in Arabic, by the way, it means zeal. They have a zeal according to God, using the biblical phrase, but not according to knowledge. So the bottom word on the left there, that square looking letter is a kaf, a C, and it means your. So what the whole controversy is who does the land belong to? Isn't that what you hear all the time? So according to Sharia law, that land belongs to the Waqf, W-A-Q-F, the Arabic word for the common property. By the way, every single masjid in your town and city is part of the global Waqf. And in America, they are all controlled by one organization called the North American Islamic Trust, and that is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Do anybody know about the Holy Land Foundation trial? What did they find out in the Holy Land Foundation trial? They found out that these individuals and organizations, also known as unindicted co-conspirators, were part of a network of individuals and organizations operating across the country that were overtly supporting Hamas. So they shut one of them down, called the Holy Land Foundation. The plan was go to the second phase of the trial and go after one you've all heard of almost every day, Council on American Islamic Relations. The second one was Islamic Society of North America, called ISNA, and the third one is North American Islamic Trust, the one I just mentioned, and shut them down too. Peter King, chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security, wrote a letter to then Attorney General Eric Holder, dated April 15, 2011, easy to remember because it's tax day, asking why this Department of Justice did not go on with Phase 2 of the Holy Land trial. He never got a substantive answer. But then we found out as time went on exactly the reason why is because the administration was bringing these individuals into positions of influence and authority within the administration, and that's another reason why I got in so much trouble, because I had already targeted every single one of them. They were all in the database. Now what is the government going to do with that derogatory information? They have two choices. To respond to it in a law enforcement way and actually follow through and shut these organizations down, or what would be the other option? Ignore it. Well, that worked for a little while, but those records were so precise and so accurate and so effective that the very same individuals that I just referred to that were being brought into the administration were being sent to secondary for additional interviews, which is awfully inconvenient to have people affiliated with the administration being brought in and questioned by Customs and Border Protection officers about what we call the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, and why. So what did they do? They filed complaints and got on the phone and called people in the executive branch of the administration, and the administration responded by ordering DHS to remove all the linking information in 820 text records that I put into the system. Then that was 1 year exactly after the Holy Land Foundation trial, which means they knew. They did it knowing. And that is the infuriating, ominous abrogation of duty that this administration has participated in from the very first day. They know exactly what they're doing. And then they go to the third level after that. What would that be? Ignore, then remove, then what's after that? Remove the people that put the information in the first place. Kill the messengers. And as I referred to earlier about knocking off the people at the top of the pyramid, I was one of them. I was actually the very first law enforcement officer that I'm aware of within the federal government who the administration came after. As early as 2006, what I call the first great purge was in the fall of 2009, 7 years ago. And then another one happened with me in the summer of 2012, which we'll look at in a little bit, and that was a destroyer case having to do with a group called Tablighi Jamaat. Has anybody ever heard me talk about the 67 records that were deleted that were related to the San Bernardino Mosque? That's the case. It was the Tablighi Jamaat. And so I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I went through 3 great purges during the course of my career. So what did I do? What would you do? If you took a vow to protect your country from threat, both foreign and domestic, and you're being told by your own chain of command to remove the evidence from the system that might help us stop terrorism, what would you do? Well, what I did is I began to seek help outside the law enforcement fence. And you know where I found it? Congress. They helped me survive. The very first person that I went to was Michelle Bachmann. And did she pay a big price for what she did? Yeah, she lost her seat. Is she sorry about it? No, I just saw her about 4 days ago. She's not sorry about it at all. Is she sorry that it happened in the human sense? Absolutely. But from more of an eternal perspective, or a person of honor and integrity, is she sorry? Absolutely not. Because she did the right thing. And then that began a journey of going to Congress 50 times. I did not do a Snowden, where I just released the information publicly and, just threw the mud against the wall and see what happened. I followed the chain of command all the way through to the very last day. And the reason why I did it was to be an example for those who come after me. You cannot say that you didn't know what the right way to do this was. No matter how difficult it was, I did it the right way. I never violated my vow or went beyond the protocols of our law enforcement community in talking to Congress, which I had a right to do, and I made full use of it. I'm not going to say a whole lot about what they didn't or did do, because a lot of people knew what was right, looked me right in the eye and said, Mr. Haney, we're going to protect you and your information, and then turn around and didn't do it. And I have a saying about history, which is that she's a fearsome woman. history is a fearsome woman. If she fastens her eye on you, you better hope you're on the right side of history, because she does not blink. And if she fastens her eye on you and you're on the wrong side of history, the moment will come and she will turn you into a stone, and you can never recover from it. And there's a lot of people in the government right now that are perilously close to being turned into stones. And we ourselves here at this level don't want that to happen, do we? You must do all you can to do your utmost for His highest, and to do your utmost to stand up for the principles that this country was founded on. If things don't turn out our way in the fall, we're going to be in a state of mourning. But if you do all that you can, at least you won't have to deal with the remorse and the guilt that maybe if you had done just a little bit more, that it might have made a difference. Don't carry that burden around. This is just a little bit about the coup that happened in Turkey. Erdogan, he suppressed that coup. That coup was an attempt to be like Egypt and replace the Sharia government with a more secular government like they did in Egypt. But it was ruthlessly put down. Tens of thousands of people lost their lives. And Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the leader of the Global Muslim Brotherhood Network, endorsed Erdogan and said that he was the leader, the legitimate leader of the global Ummah. Of course, that's where the caliphate was before. And with this new organization, notice down at the bottom it said they will only fight against those who are hostile to the Islamic nation. Well, how are you hostile to the Islamic nation? By opposing Sharia law. That's the fundamental reason why. And this is just another attempt on my part to illustrate to you the reality of the influence of Sharia law everywhere in the world. Now here's an interesting article. This is written from a condescending point of view that people who are really concerned about Sharia law really don't have anything to worry about. The very top says, Sharia law is a scary word in America these days. Politicians love to hang their platform on that word, Sharia. Earlier this week, a Trump spokesperson accused Khazar Khan of supporting Sharia law. This is the guy that waved the Constitution before the DNC and before the world. Well, who is this guy? Does he actually support Sharia law? There's his publication. By the way, I think I mentioned about having the PowerPoint, right? If you work with your coordinator, give him the email, you can have this PowerPoint. And all of these sources that I'm citing and these screen captures, you can have them. The URLs and the links are all there. You don't have to fumble around looking for everything. It's all there for you. And you can go back and look at all this stuff up. And you'll see that I'm only water skiing right now, just to have, because of the limited time that we have. Khazar Khan is a pro-Sharia Muslim, waving that Constitution in front of us like he really believes in it. The whole thing is a big, gigantic sham, and we're being played like puppets. At least they think we are. See how long ago he wrote it? 23 years ago? Do you think he's changed his mind since? Not likely. And then, and this, see the headline, Judge Glenn Beck must disclose his marathon bombing sources. Do you know about the Glenn Beck case? Anybody? See, this is a perfect illustration, and don't take it wrong because it's not personal. How come you don't know about this? A foreign national from Saudi Arabia is suing Glenn Beck for slander and defamation. A foreign national is suing a U.S. citizen for slander and defamation. According to Sharia law, slander and defamation are very serious crimes, up to and including a capital offense. The judge just ruled in the case on the 10th of this month that Glenn Beck must disclose the names of his confidential sources for the statements that he made vis-a-vis a young man named Al-Harbi who was at the scene of the Boston bombing. This is the very same individual who Janet Napolitano, Secretary of Homeland Security, told Jeff Duncan on the 18th of May did not exist. There was no person of interest, there was no subject of interest, and there was no person from Saudi Arabia who was ever going to be deported on terrorism charges. And your question, Mr. Duncan, is so full of misapprehension and misinformation that it's not even worthy of an answer, and we will give you information when we're ready to give it to you. Let us handle this case. Well, what was the problem with what she had just told him? It was a lie. How do I know that? It's a bold statement, Mr. Haney. How do you know that? Because I was holding it in my hand. I worked at the National Targeting Center, the secret squirrel headquarters of DHS. My job was creating events and vetting them. It's out of a database called the Targeting Framework. We call them events. There was one created on him, Al-Harvey, and he was to be deported. They notified the consulate in Riyadh at 17:52 in the afternoon that they were going to deport one of their Saudi citizens. Janet Napolitano knew very well that she was lying. She even did it again 4 days later with Grassley, Senator Grassley in the Intelligence Committee, insisting there was no such individual. Well, then there is a moral crisis on steroids, because now the House committee has to deal with the fact that they know she lied. How do they know she lied? Because I told them. I told them before I ever provided the written proof. Then when she had the audacity to lie, then they needed the written proof. So how do you suppose they got the written proof? I faxed it to them on their secure line at the Ford building in Washington, D.C. A week later, it was leaked by, and Glenn Beck showed some of it on the TV screen. At the same moment that he did that, when I saw it myself and I said, Glenn, I sure do wish you wouldn't have done that, one of my colleagues, the one I referred to earlier, with the 2 people from Internal Affairs, saw it too and said, I'm going to find out where that came from. And that's what set off the chain of events that led to me being relieved of my gun and all the other stuff I told you already. It was over this case. Janet Napolitano lied that any of this information ever existed, and now they cynically stand by and allow American citizens to take the hit for their abrogation of duty, pretending like none of it ever happened, but it did. The Boston bombing cases has a lot of overlap in terms of the false narrative of the Benghazi. And you have to remember that Benghazi only happened 4 or 5 months earlier. That was September of 2012. The Boston bombings happened in April of 2013. I'm still stuck in the middle of this case. Why? I'm one of the sources. So what is that going to do vis-a-vis whistleblowers, confidential sources, former law enforcement officers who are now civilians? What about the freedom of speech and the First Amendment? What is the Saudi government going to do with information on one current and one former law enforcement officer who provided information to the House Committee on Homeland Security and then saw it get leaked? And we're the ones that are taking the hit for it. This is obscene, what is happening, and it's very serious. The reason why is because if this case gains precedence, meetings like this will be illegal. Because somebody will come on purpose to get offended, and then they will sue the coordinators of this meeting and anybody else that they can name as unnamed co-conspirators in their trial. Don't think it can't happen. As I said, he's suing Glenn Beck on the basis of slander and defamation. It's called ghiba. And as I said, it's a very serious crime in Islam. We're talking about the intrusion of Sharia law, a foreign government, a foreign law, right into the middle of the U.S. Constitution, First Amendment. Regardless of what you feel about Glenn Beck, he's an American citizen. And this is a very ominous case. Here's another one. It says that warnings to women not to provoke rape games. That was August And according to the U.S. Southern Command, in 2015, we saw a total of 331,000 immigrants enter the southeast western border. Of that, this is Southern Command, we estimate that more than 30,000 of those were from countries of terrorist concern. What does this have to do with Sharia? By the way, aside from the problem of blaming the women for being raped, the U.S. government, the EU government is saying, do not provoke the immigrants. In other words, if you are attacked, it's your fault, not their fault. That's the way they're dealing with it. Here is the verse from the Quran that says that whatever your right hand possesses, you can take it. The term in Arabic is your right hand possesses there. I highlighted it because it means that if you're a Sharia compliant Muslim and you come into a non-Sharia compliant country, you can take any girl you want to. Because if you can possess them by your right hand. This is the verse, Quran, that authorizes men to marry 4 wives. But in addition to the authorization of marrying 4 wives, it also authorizes them to take whatever they can capture with their right hand and turn them into sexual slaves. And that is why anybody here involved with human trafficking and sexual slavery should know that it's authorized by the Quran. And it's all part of the strategy to ultimately force countries to submit themselves to the authority of Sharia law. It is a form of jihad to go after the women. Do you think that Donald Trump is nuts because he said that Obama administration created ISIS? No, he's not. Although Claire McCaskill says that Trump and Putin are the founders of ISIS. This is how bad the disinformation is and the spin is. This just shows that her statement betrays a complete lack of understanding of what these opposition groups actually want to accomplish, which is implementation of Sharia law. I know I sound like a broken record, but there's a point. We have to stop talking about tactics, jihad, violent extremism, violent attacks, and focus on what the purpose of it is. What's the gravitational force behind the 29,200 and something and counting attacks that have occurred around the world somewhere since 9/11. That's 1 every 4 hours, not to mention the wars that are going on, all for the same purpose. Trump is not crazy. The administration did form ISIS. They were arming them from Benghazi, and that's the reason for the cover-up in Benghazi. The Defense Intelligence Agency in August of 2012 published a report saying that there were 3 things that were going on in Benghazi. They were shipping small caches of arms to the coast of Syria. They were providing those arms to the 3 main opposition groups on the ground: Al-Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda of Iraq, and the Muslim Brotherhood. And again, no wonder I was in so much trouble all the time. I was targeting the very people that the administration was working with.